Story 1. Hello, dear friend. This is a story that just came to my mind, and I want to share it with you. It might be scary, but I hope you enjoy reading it. Years ago, I lived in a small town in America. One night, I was alone at home, and there was a strong wind blowing outside. It was dark and silent. Everyone was asleep, and I was the only one awake. Suddenly, I heard a strange and eerie sound coming from my window. It was a voice, like a desperate and terrifying plea for help. I looked over there and saw a hand outside the window, hitting the glass with a red shoe. I knew very well that my windows were locked, and no one could enter. But this hand had come from somewhere, and I couldn't imagine how a person could reach my window. With trembling hands and a pounding heart, I called the police. They responded quickly and sent security forces to my house. But when we looked at the window, there was no one there anymore. Everything was strangely calm, and we saw no signs of any destruction or tampering. Since that day, I have never found peace. I always look at my window in the darkness of the night, expecting that strange hand to appear again. But it never came, and I never understood what it was and why it happened. Story 2. One day, I decided to move to another city in America. I rented a house that was located on a quiet and secluded street. This house was old and dark, with large windows that opened to the street. When I moved into the house, I felt a strange sensation inside me. It always seemed like someone was watching me from behind the windows, but every time I looked, there was no one there. This eerie feeling stayed with me even during the nights. One night, I was alone in the house when strange noises began. Sounds coming from behind the walls, sounds that resembled demonic laughter. My heart started racing, and sweat filled my forehead. I quickly called the police and informed them of what was happening. But they told me that the sounds probably came from somewhere else and couldn't assist me. This situation was more terrifying than anything I had ever experienced before. I stayed awake until late at night, unable to sleep. No one came to help me, and every day, this sense of fear and terror within me grew stronger. I was living alone in this dark house, facing an unknown terror every day. One night, as I was closing the windows, I suddenly saw something behind one of them. A dark and demonic face was laughing. Its eyes were red and glowing, and its lips twisted into a sinister and horrifying smile. I let out a terrifying scream and retreated, seeking refuge in my hands. But when I looked back at the window, there was nothing there anymore. Everything strangely calmed down. However, as I continued on, the feeling of insecurity and anxiety still lingered within me. During the days, I conducted research on the darkness and spirituality in this old house. I found information about the past of this place, indicating that all previous residents had mysteriously disappeared. This information only intensified my fear, and more than ever, I wanted to solve this mystery. One night, while I was attentively listening to all the strange noises and events, I discovered a hidden door beneath the carpet. With trembling hands, I opened it and proceeded forward. The dark twists and turns unfolded before me. After navigating through intricate paths, I arrived at a large room. There stood an ancient statue with a terrifying and demonic face. A deep sense of malevolence and wickedness radiated from that statue. It was then that I suddenly realized the face of that statue was the same as the demonic face I had seen in the window. A profound sense of fear and terror consumed my entire being. But in that moment, I decided that I had to put an end to this darkness and return to a safe home. Carefully, I took the statue and carried it with me. By removing the statue of darkness from the house, all the sounds and terrifying sensations disappeared. My home became bright and peaceful, and a feeling of calmness and peace settled in my heart. Finally, after a long time, I was completely liberated from this terrifying experience. I set the demonic statue on fire and poured its ashes into running water. This cleansing ritual cleared my mind and soul, giving me a renewed sense of hope and joy. From then on, no dark incidents occurred in my home. I resumed my life with tranquility and returned to peace and serenity. Story 3. Hello dear friend. In this story, I will describe a terrifying experience on a remote road in America. I hope you enjoy reading it. On a dark and rainy night, I was driving on an unnamed road in the middle of the desert. Some of the scary stories I had heard from others twisted in my mind, creating fear and terror within me. Unaware of what awaited me, I continued driving at a moderate speed. The endless dark road stretched around me, with no signs of human life in sight. As I continued, a light suddenly appeared on the horizon. Unlike anything I had seen before, it was a strange lantern-like light. I moved toward it, and over time, the light grew more intense. When I got closer, I saw an old and dilapidated building. Surprisingly, I parked and got out of the car. The door of the building was open, revealing a dark and eerie entrance in front of me. With trembling hands and a pounding heart, I ventured inside the building. The walls were covered in dust and spiders, and I heard no sound within the structure. But with each step, my fear increased. Finally, I reached a large, dark room. In the room, there was an old bed covered in dust and dirt. But what was truly terrifying was a large mirror on the opposite wall from the bed. I looked carefully into the mirror and saw a horrifying image of myself. But what was even stranger was that the image in the mirror was moving and chasing me. With fear and terror, I ran out of the building and toward my car, but what happened behind me was more terrifying than anything I had experienced before. When I reached the car, I realized that the headlights had gone out. With trembling hands, I took the keys from the car and tried to turn it on. But the car showed no response. As I felt that something was approaching me every moment, a strange sense of darkness enveloped me. Suddenly, the road lights turned on suddenly. A terrifying and unfamiliar voice came from behind me. Despite the fear that dominated my heart, I looked behind me and saw an unknown person in front of me. He had a strange and terrifying appearance. His face was pale and completely decayed, and blood was dripping from his mouth. His eyes seemed black and devoid of any emotion. He took a step towards me, extending his bloodied hands towards me. Fear and terror penetrated my heart, and I had no choice but to run. With the remaining energy in my hands, I sprinted towards the road. But no matter how much distance I put between myself and that person, he was like a ghost behind me, chasing me. With relentless effort, I fled towards a small house on the edge of the road. With my knees aching and my breathing rapid, I pulled the door of the house and sought refuge inside. Inside the house, darkness and deep silence prevailed. But as I entered the living room, I quickly realized that it was not safe here either. In the mirror on the living room wall, I saw an image of myself, but this time with something I never imagined. An image of myself with a contorted and decayed face appeared in the mirror. But this time, the mirror was not still. The image of me in that mirror began to move. My decayed eyes turned towards me, and a demonic smile appeared on my lips. A terrifying voice came out of the mirror and said, "Wherever you go, I will always be behind you. You can't escape from me." Fear and terror reached its peak. My hands fell to my head, and I closed my eyes, hoping that this nightmare would end. But when I opened my eyes, a sea of mirrors surrounded me. Everywhere was filled with grotesque and terrifying images of myself. The mirrors had all come closer to me, they swayed, danced, and emitted a horrifying sound. With every step I took towards the door, the mirrors came closer and surrounded me. Restlessly, I moved towards the door and grabbed the doorknob. But in that moment, all the mirrors shattered, and their shards flew towards me. I reached for the doorknob and forcefully swung the door open. Outside, the dark and rainy road stared at me. I ran at an excessive speed away from that house and towards my car. Upon reaching my car, its headlights turned on instantly, and the engine started with a sound. More than anything, I thanked that the car responded and saved me. With full speed, I escaped from that dark and terrifying road. Far from that bitter place, all the fear and terror I had experienced remained within me. But at least, I was alive and had escaped from that terrifying experience. From that day on, I never went back to that dark and terrifying road. But the memories of that night always remained in my mind and served as a reminder that there is a dark world that is better to stay away from.